episode 100 of School Librarians United. I'm your host, Amy Herman. Yeah, I'm just going to have to say that again. Episode 100. Kind of unbelievable. I've been saying episode 100 all day, and I've been walking around with this silly smile on my face. And it is episode 100 of School Librarians United. I'm your host, Amy Herman. I can't remember the specific episode, but not too long ago, I lamented that I was a one-person team. Compared to professional podcasters with a sound crew, producers, and tech support, and writers, and editors, and researchers, and schedulers, I was running the show, so to speak. And I realized this week, as I looked ahead to posting my 100th episode, that I couldn't be more wrong. I suppose that this is also in keeping with past episodes where I disagree with an earlier version of myself. But the idea that somehow this podcast is the product of me and me alone couldn't be further from the truth. I have always asserted the importance of giving credit where credit is due. So, in a feeble attempt to try and remember everybody I should thank, I'm going to try and do this. First of all, I need to thank my husband and my 3 children. They appreciate how important this podcast is to me, and they've learned that when mom is happy, the entire house is happy. I want to thank my state organization of school librarians called MAME, Michigan Association for Media and Education. These inspiring school librarians were my very first PLN, and where my earliest presentations grew into eventually podcast episodes. To all the guests who took risks in agreeing to be interviewed, you graciously gave your time and your talents, and I will always be grateful. To the listeners who messaged or emailed me with your feedback and your episode suggestions, these were like podcasting gifts that were waiting for me in my email every day. To listeners who share this podcast with their PLN and at meetings and on social media, people learn about podcasts through other listeners. There is no better advertising for a podcast than recommendations from listeners. And to listeners who let me know that my podcast helped you in some way, you are my why. Why I'm here today recording my 100th episode. This podcast is dedicated to the issues and challenges school librarians face every day. As a school librarian in my 14th year, I found myself asking the question, where is the podcast that will help me do my job? I wanted a podcast which addressed the nuts and bolts of running a successful library program. I don't claim to have the answers, but I hope that this is a platform to share resources and exchange ideas. Now is the perfect time to mention that all the ideas and opinions expressed in this podcast by myself, by my interview guests, and listeners who contact the podcast are our own and do not reflect those of our districts. When incorporating research, I always make sure to cite my sources. So whether you are a novice or a veteran school librarian, this podcast has something for you. I'd like to extend a very special welcome this week to listeners Stacy in Kentucky and Dustin in South Carolina. I welcome you and all listeners to reach out with your feedback, questions, and episode suggestions either on Facebook, Twitter, or the email address schoollibrariansunited@gmail.com. If you include your mailing address, I will be sure to send you a podcast sticker. And now for today's episode, Your Graphic Library, and my interview with Sara Smith. Sara Smith, welcome to the podcast.
Hello. Thanks for having me.
Anyone who follows Sara on Twitter will know exactly why you are the perfect guest for today's conversation. Sara, would you please share with us a little bit about your library and especially about your graphic library?
Okay, so I am a teacher librarian at a high school in a rural area of California. So it's kind of the forgotten area of California. Everyone thinks that we live on a beach. And no, I'm surrounded by farmland. There's cows on my way home, like corn, all kinds of things, you know. So we're out here in the country. And my school district, right now we have one high school. We just opened up a second location. So we're still kind of like one school, 2 campuses kind of thing. So I have 2 collections then that I'm curating. And so the collection at my main campus, I have 21,000 books. And then the other campus that currently serves 300 freshmen, there's about 5,000 books. And so we're building that collection up. So the main campus has about 3,000 students at it. Like I said, the other one is 300 ninth graders. And so that's going to grow eventually and become its own high school. And so within those two collections, at the main campus, I have 2,800 graphic novels and about 270 at the other campus. With my comic book order is continuously coming in. It comes in like little shipments every week. So I'm getting about 300 more that are going to be coming in by when it's all said and done for this school year.
That is amazing. I was going to ask you, what portion of your book budget has been allocated for your graphic library? And
I got to do some math.
But it's easy to conclude that what you spend on graphic novels probably surpasses what most people do on a regular basis, because it sounds like you've made a commitment to sustaining, not just starting a graphic library. Like, I'm just going to sort of have a token bookshelf over here with my graphic novels. Like, this is not only you're sustaining this collection.
Right. So just some quick math here, just for the main campus. I won't do the math on the new one. But the main campus, I spend about 25% of my book budget on graphic novels every year. And so I started with like a modest little collection that I inherited that was a lot of like the kind of, I guess, stereotypical graphic novels that are in libraries, especially school libraries. So they were like history topics, like, the Battle of Gettysburg, but graphic novel, like those kinds of things. And so I had to expand it from the ones that I inherited to today. So this didn't happen all at once. This has been about 5 years of investment to get to where I am right now.
Well, and I think that's an excellent point, because collection development doesn't happen in one purchase. And
no.
it is a sustained, it is why being able to stay in a library and not only build those relationships with your coworkers, but also have that, commitment to your collection and to see through the goals that you have. Am I correct? Because I don't want to put words in your mouth, but it sounds like you started off with what is considered more a traditional or a safe sort of collection of a graphic library, and now it's become far more edgier.
Yes, I am definitely able and willing to push the envelope. So I think the edgiest thing I had in the collection when I inherited it was bone. So that was it. So now I've gone, I think I would put my raciest title as Tokyo Ghoul. Have that one. And I have Tokyo Ghoul Re, which is not for the faint of heart. When my freshmen come and get that one, I will check it out to them and I say, hey, just so you know, like, this one's pretty violent. So just, if you're starting to feel uncomfortable, please bring it back. Don't push yourself, whatever. But it's pretty graphic, pretty gory. There's a lot of dismemberment and stuff. So it comes with a little warning.
There are definitely readers who eat that up. But but that was something that I'm glad you said, that you do give some sort of advanced little heads up. I know I do that with my students when I know a book has a sad part.
Right.
I sometimes tell my kids, because I'm dealing with littles, and I say, grab a box of Kleenex.
Yep.
Okay, so there are some sad parts in this story. Now, obviously, no one's going to send me an angry email because a dog died in a book, but I have to imagine that over the years, your administration has come to not only expect a certain amount of attention being given to your graphic library, but do you sense that you have the support of your administration when those concerned parent emails come in?
So I'm going to knock on all the wood right now. I haven't had anybody complain. So here's me knocking on the wood. Like, I haven't had anyone come back. I haven't even had a student come back and they were like, Miss, this was too much, I haven't had any of that. I haven't had parents like, what are you checking out to my kid? In fact, the only parent I've ever had in my 6 years in the library, 7 years in the library, was a parent that was upset that their child was checking out paranormal romance books. And it wasn't graphic novels, it was fiction. And so that's the only one I've ever had. And so my administrators, if they have fielded any complaints, I have never known. They never come to me and say, hey, we had this message. What is this about?
And that came up in a conversation I had because I'm reading, I'm actually more accurately listening. Right now, I had to take a break from all of the election chaos. Yeah. And I figured that the best thing to take my mind off of the election chaos is some paranormal romance smut. And in the form of Stephanie Meyer's latest book. And Midnight Sun.
Midnight Sun, yes. I still need to get my hands on that one.
I've been taking advantage of the fact that right now our library houses the kids club before school and after school program. Mm-hmm. So when people walk into my library and see me wearing headphones, nobody is going to question that decision because I have screaming children in my library, and I'm disliking the arrangement very much. But I'm amused because paranormal romance, are parents concerned that their children are going to start like lusting after vampires? Is that the concern?
Yeah, I'm really not sure. I think it was more so just a disdain for the occult in general. Uh-huh. But I mean, we took care of it really quickly. The parent, I offered to put a note on her child's record that she could check out anything else besides that, and the parent was fine with that. So it didn't even progress to the realm of you need to take all these books out of the library. I didn't get the sense that the parent was like, how dare you even have this? It was very much about her own child. And like I said, I've never had anything so far for any comic book or graphic novel of any kind with parents coming to me and complaining. And I haven't had students necessarily too, they don't run off and, show their parents ooh, look, this one has boobies in it.
No, they go off and show their friends. You know what they do? Yeah. They show their friends, and all of a sudden you become this hero who is giving them books that are interesting. And yes, is edgy interesting? Edgy is very interesting. Mm-hmm. And, pushing the envelope with students your age is something I don't think they want to rat you out. I think they see you as one of the best people in the building right now. And can I ask, because you mentioned making a note in the student's record. Mm-hmm. And I know that there are people nodding their heads listening to this saying, yeah, we've had to do that before. I don't usually say psycho parent in the record, but we usually have some sort of little code in there or a Post-it note in our circulation book next to the student's patron card that just says, just be aware. Be aware of parent. Yes, helicopter parent. We draw a little helicopter. And but can I ask you, since you mentioned that, do you have any sort of outward markings? And I know, friends, you have to appreciate Sarah and I have not even gotten past question number 2. And we have gotten into some fairly substantial issues when it comes to building our graphic library. And I will say, friends, just as an aside, this has been an education for me because I see these interviews as an opportunity to educate myself on something I'm woefully lacking. So I am so incredibly excited because I think my listeners, especially at the middle school and high school, are going to be thrilled when you see what I have to show you. So Sarah, you mentioned giving a little heads up. Do you have any indicators on the outside of your materials, your books, that would give the students an indication as to whatever might be triggered, whether it's violence or it's sexual themes or that kind of thing?
I do not.
All right. So you are the sticker. You are the person who is going to just give a little aside. And I think that's important. I know in my library we have a scary sticker which goes on the spine. And all that does is tend to attract more attention because when you're 11, you want to find something that is the scariest thing ever. And since Mrs. Herman doesn't have Stephen King's It in my collection, apparently we're going to have to find something else.
Yes. And I have 2 of those books.
Of course you do, because you're an edgy librarian.
Yep. I have all kinds of Stephen King, and I inherited them.
Oh, fantastic.
But I just continue to buy them.
Yes. Well, but I mean, those are gateway drugs. I mean, I know when we were looking to get one of my high school sons sort of hooked on a book, I know my husband worked his way through all of the Stephen King because those are the kinds of books he likes. And no surprise, my son picked up on it very quickly. But then my other son's an artist. So the graphic novels, we have seen quite a few graphic novels and many trips to the comic book store for my sons when they were living at home. There's no doubt that your website, The Graphic Library, goes beyond a passing fancy for this format. And friends, I'm including a link in the show notes. And you might be surprised when you realize that 100% of our resources today come from Sara's website, The Graphic Library. Because it is incredibly comprehensive, and as a school librarian looking for some guidance in this area, I can't tell you how incredibly helpful it is. Sara, you've been working on this website for a long time. Can you tell us about the decision you made to, when you were reviewing all of these graphic novels, to put it in a place where everyone could reach it and access it and use it to build their own collections?
Sure. So when I started as a teacher librarian, like probably a lot of people, I got handed the selection policy, and it says, certain things need to be met. Chief among which is that our books need to have 2 professional reviews that recommend it for purchase. And so the professional reviews for lots of people are going to be similar: the Hornbook, Kirkus, School Library Journal, all those kind of things. And when I started up there, I don't even know if School Library Journal at that point even had the pages that they do now on graphic novels. I think it just went straight from YA to like the picture book section. Like, I don't even know if they were there. So there was this huge lack of reviews. And so the only other way to kind of get around having the professional reviews is that if we read it ourselves and knew that the content was going to be appropriate and it was, connected to some sort of curriculum standard or something like that. So I was already a voracious reader of graphic novels. I started my gateway drug with Sailor Moon in junior high, and I never looked back. So I already had a basis for a lot of the series that I wanted to buy, but I started kind of getting involved with my state library association, the California School Library Association. And one of my good friends now, she's currently the president, Katie McNamara, which I'll give her this huge shout out here. So she and I were kind of talking about where I could find my niche, like where could I be helpful to the field of librarianship. And she and I are both also in Q, which is a technology, big technology, like professional learning network in California and Nevada. And so I was kind of leaning with technology because that's a big part of teacher librarianship, is being technology leaders. But I kind of felt like there was a lot of that. And especially in my area, I'm not sure about other parts of the country, but we have a lot of tech coaches being hired instead of teacher librarians. So that part of our job was kind of like being taken over. So the conversation was like, the only other thing I can think of that I can contribute is my knowledge of graphic literature and just trying to get these into the hands of kids. And, what's stopping me from being the quote unquote professional reviewer? I don't work for the Horn Book, but I definitely have a lot of experience. And so I started the website just as a place to kind of give some of those reviews, have a place for people to go to find these things. And it's really, really taken off in the last year. It was really my COVID project too. I put a lot of time and effort into expanding it and expanding the readership during quarantine because I didn't have a lot of other demands on my time. So, in previous years, I did maybe one review a month. And then in this year, I challenged myself to read and post one review a day. So there is a ton. I'm like 10, 15 books behind right now because it's been a little bit challenging with the beginning of school starting up. But I am pretty close to one review a day for this entire calendar year.
Friends, I want to encourage you to visit this website. It is incredibly rich in detail, and it's elegant, and it's very clearly laid out in how the information is being presented. And I, on the one hand, I feel like because I'm not a voracious reader of graphic novels, I feel like I'm somehow doing my students a disservice. On the other hand, the nice thing is that, Sara has generously not only included all of these reviews, but all of the other fantastic resources have been curated in a way that if you didn't go anywhere else, this would be a great place to go to develop your graphic library. In fact, this episode, Your Graphic Library, is a nod to the fact that graphic novels only scratches the surface of this format. And on your terminology page, it explains in detail the important nuance and why we can't paint with such a broad brush this part of our collection. Could you just sort of give us a distinction between the large sort of subcategories of graphic novels?
Sure. So graphic novels, like you said, it's kind of the umbrella term for the format people interchange it with genre, but it's definitely a medium. So in that is comic books, and I use, on my page, I use it as one word. And I went to a panel, with Stan Lee before he passed away, and he very much was of the mind that the modern comic books, they should be one word. It's not funny stories. It's a comic book. It's a book told in comic form. So I use it as one word, even though Google Docs likes to yell at me for that. And then there's manga, which is the format that was popularized in Japan. And it's since my time in junior high reading manga, it has definitely gone to other countries now. There's manhwa is from France. There's manhwa is, I think, Korean. Like, it's gone all over the place. And so it's a style that has been adopted into other cultures now. And then I try and use like the term graphic literature is kind of the full length books told in a graphic format. And most people call those graphic novels, but then to me that conflates the umbrella term for the entire medium. So we need to find, like, as scholars, as readers, we need to find a better term for those full length books. I'm like things that are published. One of the first publishers that comes to mind is First Second. They have full length books that are about 400 pages, and they're told entirely in graphic format. So most people will call that a graphic novel, but so is a manga, and so is a comic book. So we're getting all confused.
Well, and what would you say to like when I think of, it's not correct, but when I think of the word literature, I'm going to think of like adaptations, like graphic adaptations of books that are already in, in a standard novelization, a novel form. So like, you take any of the any of Shakespeare's works and put it into graphic novel. You take, Diary of Anne Frank or The Diary of a Young Girl, or you take Wrinkle in Time. I'm thinking of Handmaid's Tale.
Yes.
And, do you see, I think so many of us with a very cursory understanding of this medium see graphic novels as an opportunity to tantalize our readers, to draw them in with the idea that, I guess I'm wondering, as somebody who loves graphic novels, do you find that offensive? That the idea that if my, English class is studying Shakespeare, that to use the graphic novel adaptation of the particular play that we're studying. Is that all right? Is it, I don't think it's an equivalent, but do you think that on some level that's acceptable?
Absolutely.
Okay.
So I have a background in English as an English literature major. I taught English for 6 years before I moved into the library. And I had these notes for a question for a little bit later, but I'll just skip right into it. So I wish I could take credit for my school using graphic novels in their curriculum, but it was actually one of my colleagues, a world literature teacher, who started off using Batman. He used Batman Year One as part of a unit they did on transformation and showing characters go through a transformation process through the story. So they did like Harrison Bergeron. He did like a bunch of other short stories, and then he's got Batman Year One in there. And he was the gateway drug. Everyone else in his PLC said, "What? I want to use comic books. What is this? Why aren't I getting these?" And so now, fast forward years later, the only level, 11th grade English is American Lit, and so they don't have a Shakespeare play. The other 3 have a Shakespeare play. All 3 use a graphic novel version of the Shakespeare play, and it has the original Shakespearean language. It's not a translation. It's not a modernization. It's the original language. And something that has always stuck with me from my Shakespearean class was that Shakespeare is meant to be seen. If you're reading it from a page, you're losing so much of the nuance. You're losing so much of the context. And so the graphic novels give it that context without having to take a bunch of kids to a play, because we're kind of a poor school. Like, like we can't they're not always putting on Romeo and Juliet in the fall, like we have to find other ways to get our kids to be able to see it. And just watching the movie over and over again, like, okay, there's got to be another way that we can get these kids into Shakespeare. And the last couple of years that we've been using the graphic novel, the kids have really enjoyed it, and they enjoy it more so than just taking a big old textbook and reading and, okay, Joe's going to be Romeo and Sarah, you're going to be Juliet, and let's read. And they're boring. It's not good.
I have to say, as somebody who sat in those English classes and read Shakespeare in high school, I also elected to take the Shakespeare class in college for my intro freshman English class. And, it was a very sort of formulaic. You read the Shakespeare in class, everybody took on roles, and then for the next 2.5 days you watched the video. And I wonder how, transformative this is, going from, instead of reading, I don't want to say dry text, but, just print on a paper, and instead giving a very vibrant and very engaging graphic novel with the exact language. And it has not been somehow morphed into common day language. It's Shakespeare's words. And then instead of watching the movie, you don't need to watch the movie now. You've got your visual. And no parent is enthusiastic when they find out their children are going to spend the next 2.5 days in English class, watching a movie.
Right.
So, this seems like a wonderful trade-off.
Yes.
All right. Now, I do have to ask, because especially at the elementary level, I'm finding that there are, nonfiction has seen the graphic novel medium as a great way to capture the attention of readers. So especially at the elementary level, we've got a whole segment of my graphic library as being nonfiction. And so there are science, there's a whole series, I think there's like 23 titles in this, the graphic science series, and they take a topic like volcanoes and depict everything in graphic novel format. So it really has its own like following as well. And I know with another one that's very popular is like the Nathan Hale's Hazardous Tales.
Yes.
And that, for me as a former history teacher, I'm like, where were these when I was teaching history for all those years? So can I ask, at the high school level, do you find there's still that, I mean, are there some nonfiction, aspects to your graphic library, or not so much?
So it kind of shifts the older they get, and it's away from the informational topics and more into the memoirs. So I have quite a few graphic memoirs and biographies. March is pretty popular. Mouse is pretty popular. Hey Kiddo, obviously pretty popular. So those kinds of books, the high school kids kind of gravitate towards those as a graphic nonfiction title. But I have some science topics and history topics, and they don't move very often. They're not checked out as much because it does seem for some of those titles they were probably written for elementary, and they were just kind of selected and purchased and put in a high school library. So the kids, they're a little bit too young. They're too explaining down the topics and stuff. But my history books in general don't really get circulated a lot. They would rather go online and find resources and rather than pick up a book. So the memoirs and the biographies are really the nonfiction that I kind of push is in my graphic section.
Wonderful. I'd like to address certain elements of your website because it is a terrific go-to resource for anyone, especially those of us who aren't graphic novel aficionados, looking to build our graphic library. So first of all is your review list by author. And I think what I love about this so much, because, it's not unusual for librarians to have a review of a book they've read. And what I love is that you have included a rating, a suitability rating, and you tag each of your reviews to enable the filtering and refining of our searches based on ratings, audience, and the subject tags of all these books. That has to take a lot of time.
So I actually kind of cheat a little bit. I have a Google Doc that has all the links to my subject tags. And so I just copy and paste them onto the reviews when I'm done. And so there's two kind of different sections you can go to find the reviews. There's the review list by author, and then just the regular feed of review pages. And so when I make those review feeds, I'll have one window has the review list by author up, so that I also tag the previous volumes in the series in case people, stumble upon my review of volume 4. It's like, well, where's volume 1? So those are on the bottom as well. But all of that is copy and pasted. So I have kind of the same format, the same sentences. So it always says reviews of previous novels, and that's on my Google Doc, and I just copy and paste them over. So I'm not sitting there typing that, relinking them every time.
No, but friends, once you take a look at this, you have to scroll. You have to seriously scroll through all of these reviews, and they are. I think what's especially appreciated is, as a librarian, it's so sensical. This is a very logical presentation of these reviews. And like you said, you included all the volumes that you reviewed. And friends, when you click on any of these reviews, it really is so incredibly helpful because, all too often, I buy books that I've never seen before. And, unless somebody is sending you, advanced reader copies, oftentimes it's a rather expensive experiment to buy a book and not know if you're going to put it in the library.
Right.
What I love when I click on a review is that you include your own personal rating. And I think that's fair, given that you've had your entire reading history to fall back on as someone who can appreciate this format. The suitability level. So you've got high school and you've got middle school. Forgive me, did I not see elementary, or do you have an elementary tag?
Yes, elementary's there, and I also have adult.
Okay. And so it's really really important because as some of us treading very sort of cautiously through this world of building a graphic library, I think it is very much appreciated. And friends, when you look at these reviews are so complete that you actually have to open up each of the reviews and click on more. And, and I love that you also include the tags so that you can sort by theme. And it really makes this so incredibly valuable to any of us who want to make purchases and know that we can feel confident about them.
Yes. And there are a couple, the rating, the scale of 1 to 10, like it is still subjective. So I do try and include some of the reasons why I've given it that reading. Because there are genres that I gravitate towards and there's genres that I really don't like. And so it's human nature, we don't like the books we don't like. And so they're going to have a lesser review or a lesser, rating. So I try and explain it as well. And I include any sort of like triggers, if there's a lot of violence, if there's nudity, what kind of nudity, especially it's a thing that comes up a lot in conversation about manga, that there's a lot of nudity. And it's the way that the Japanese feel about a naked body is different than the Western audience. And so it's not a super shameful thing. It's not taboo for people to strip down and take a bath. Like it's not a big deal. But then we see that here and, oh no, she's naked. So, I'll include things like if it was a sexual thing, if it was, passing nudity, if it was because people are taking a bath.
Well, and I do appreciate that because there are listeners to the podcast who are in the Middle East. The UAE has considerable downloads and recently Oman. Hello to all our listeners in Oman.
Hello.
Yes. Hello. So, it is really important to be sensitive to the cultural norms if you are teaching in a country where, this is not only is it not appreciated, it would violate expectations of you as a professional when you're building your collection. I imagine that would be spelled out. And I have heard from on library Facebook, for example, that books that have any sort of hint of revealing the human form might find themselves having to pull those books from the collection. So, but I also love that you've even taken the time to include, fans might also, if you're a fan of, Shannon Hale, you might like this book. If you're a fan of Noelle Stevenson, you might like this book. And, that kind of, wink and a nod really does make our jobs a lot easier because all the time, our heads are flooded with all of these authors and all of these illustrators and all of these books that we want to feverishly get to our students, and being able to make those connections. Oh, this book reminds me of this author. And if you like this book, you might like this book. And so you've done the work for us. And I really think that you can't, discount just how valuable this is when you are trying to build a graphic library. So I love that you took the time to do that. And I know friends will appreciate that when they get a chance to look at it. Friends, I want to also mention on Sarah's website, she has very graciously included her presentations. And I think, am I correct, Sarah, that if I scrolled, I would find all of the presentations you have done as a librarian. Am I correct?
Yes. So that's another section of the website. It's called info postings. And so I put sort of informational things that people might find valuable. So I know a lot of people like to build off of award winners. So I round up all the award winners, and that's one of the info postings. But then when I do a presentation afterwards, it's usually difficult to get those resources out to people. If they didn't attend the conference, they don't get the resources emails, they're not part of the know. And so I started putting them on the website because then as I'm continuing to talk with people, especially on Twitter, and they're like, hey, do you have a list? Like I can just start building stuff. Why, yes, I do. So there's a presentation and there's links to Google Docs that have the list as well. So if you don't want to scroll through the entire presentation, you can just download the Google Doc and have the titles.
Friends, I know that many of you, like me, would love to attend conferences, and it's oftentimes a matter of finances. The cost of travel is prohibitive. And by the way, I don't belong to the California School Library Association. So I would have loved to have attended your presentation in February. And I know that you have a following who have made sure to always make sure to attend your conference presentations. And again, for those of us who do not get to see Sara present face to face, we have the next best thing, and that is this presentation that she's put together. We have her resources, which she has painstakingly put together, your 2020 middle grade and high school recommended titles. And for anybody who's working with a more modest budget, or somebody who can't allocate 25% of their budget to buying, purchasing and building their graphic library, you might take that shortcut initially to look at the, your top picks and then branch out.
Yeah. On those lists, I have student top picks and then my personal ones. So these, my students are always at the forefront of what I purchase because they're the ones that are going to be reading it. I like to, buy books that I like too, but it's not just about me. So I have those, I have a little symbol for the ones that are top picks from students. And then another symbol is my top picks.
Sara, I have to ask, when you are determining your students' top picks, are you using circulation stats, or are you, do you have a way in which the kids can vote on what their favorite books are in your graphic library?
It's mostly circulation stats, and then I do the old-fashioned look at the date stamp. How many date stamps are there? So I also kind of just keep track in my head. How often are things going out? How often are things getting asked for? How often are kids disappointed because they go over to the shelf and that volume is still out? So the ones that are talked about, and my graphic novel section is right next to my desk. Literally, my chair faces all of my graphic novels. So I can see what they're browsing. I can see what they're picking up. I hear what they're talking to each other about. And so it's basically based off of observation. I don't have a way for them to vote, which would probably be cooler, but I just do it off of my observations.
I know some teachers and I've some librarians, and I'll be honest, I've never tried this, but they do brackets during March Madness. They'll do brackets with books, and I've seen very elaborate. This is where Pinterest, friends, if you go on Pinterest and look up book brackets, March Madness, instead of basketball teams, they do a bracket for fiction, or in this case you could do your graphic library. And I tell my students sometimes I'm like Noah, and I like to buy 2 copies of everything if I can, if I have the money. I imagine that there are some titles which you're buying more than 2 of.
Generally with manga, I try and buy the first 2, I buy 2 copies of at least the first 5. And if it's a really popular series, like My Hero Academia is super popular, so I have 2 copies of the first 10 volumes of that one, just because kids are always waiting for it. And it was one of the first things to start getting checked out when we just got Sora up and running. So Naruto went out first and My Hero went out first. So those ones kids are always waiting. I accidentally got 2 of the box set of Naruto, so I have 2 volumes, 1 through 42.
That's a happy accident. That's a happy accident.
Yeah, that was called Follett didn't know what they were cataloging, and so it told me that they were 2 separate things, and then they showed up and they were not. So okay.
And hopefully it worked in your favor. I'm curious because this is going to demonstrate just how precious little I know about most manga. But, when we have series especially in the elementary library, oftentimes they aren't serial. It's not an order sequencing. It doesn't matter if you read book number 7 because, book number 2 wasn't there. And thankfully, on the modest budget that I'm working on, when I buy a series of books, for the most part, Dan Gutman's My Weird School Days, nobody cares what order you read those books in. Magic Treehouse, I'm sorry. It doesn't matter what order you read those books in. But I'm guessing that with many of your books in your graphic library, order does matter.
Oh,
and
yes.
Kids are going to wait because you don't want to spoil certain story arcs.
The only time I have kids skipping around, it's usually only with manga, is if they've watched the anime, so they kind of know what happened anyway, and they're reading the book, just kind of see what the book is like. But comics are incredibly sequential, to the point where they're some of the hardest to buy for because they have crossover events, and you need to read, issue 1 of Peter Parker Spider-Man, and then he's going to have a crossover with Spider-Woman, so you better get that volume too. So it gets incredibly intricate with comics, but manga, they're fully sequential. I can't actually think of a title off the top of my head where you can read the volumes out of order, because the story does build on itself.
I think you're being played by the publishers. I think they've sucked you in, and you are now fully committed to this passion that you are sharing with your students. It's amazing.
Graphic novels is not for the completionists at heart. You will drive yourself crazy trying to complete a story arc through all of the different stories. And that's Marvel and DC know what they're doing to sell books to people that need to have it all.
But, and going back to this idea that you've not heard complaints from parents, and I'm going to throw out a theory here, is that parents are so completely delighted to see, I'm going to say, especially older students, show this interest in reading. It's not unusual for parents to come to us and say, "Oh, I need to get my child interested in reading," but it's almost like when they get to, in your case with high school students, it is. I know that the level of reading interest it drops off, and it's devastating, but if parents see their children reading a book, they're not going to scrutinize what their child is reading and say, "Let me see that book." No, I'd rather you not read anything. I mean, I think they're thrilled that you have excited this interest in all this graphic library that you've, curated for your students. So, friends, in addition to your presentations, you've also included articles. And I have so much respect for somebody who sits down and writes an article, because I've tried it before and it's painstakingly hard for me to do. I'm not a writer. But you wrote a wonderful article. And friends, I really strongly encourage you to read this article. It's The Beginning Buyer's Guide, Tips and Tricks for Starting a Graphic Novel Collection. That's just about the best hand-holding you can do to somebody like me, sort of coming from the outside and wanting very much to learn about this.
Yes, that was the goal for the article, was trying to get at least a primer, because I know buying and collecting, doing collection development for graphic novels is very intimidating. And in talking with friends, I had one of my friends did her graduate thesis on how school library programs prepare us to collect and do collection development on graphic novels. And the answer was basically they don't. So there's just a lot of people out there that don't know where to start. They don't know where to start in this just huge array of books that are available. And so I put together some of the things that to me have become second nature, have become things that duh, I obviously know this. Everyone knows this. But in talking with people, it's become apparent, no, not everyone actually thinks like that. So let me write some of these down so other people can know.
Well, and I think stupidly, I assume, because I have spent the last 14 years building collections in the libraries where I worked, that naturally building a graphic library would be simply another part of the library I'm shifting my attention to. Mm-hmm. And it's not, there are considerations that we have to make when looking at graphic novels. And as you said, the numbers, the serial, you have to be, you can't miss certain, you can't start at the end of a series. You have to start at the beginning of a series. What else would you say, when it comes to, starting a graphic novel, collection, why is it so different from trying to build other parts of our collection?
So I think because I think you touched on it before, that graphic novels are a way to hook kind of some of those reluctant readers. So you're not just able to go out and get whatever the starred books are from School Library Journal. Those are not what the reluctant readers want to read. They want to read like super interesting, really fast paced, something that's going to grab their attention. And for the longest time, and it's still to some extent a little true, that the books that are being reviewed and people are buying are still kind of the highbrow literature that reluctant readers still don't want. So they don't, just because it has a picture on it doesn't mean that they need some sort of like huge introspective novel, right? So they want Spider-Man, they want My Hero, and those don't have reviews. Those are not included in what people would normally look to select. And so I think a lot of people get discouraged. They start buying graphic novels. I've got all these things that have really good reviews, and all these people told me that they were going to get checked out, and then I put them in my library and nobody touched them. So why should I bother?
Well, and I'll add to that. So many of us buy award-winning books, and honor books and medal winners with the expectation that those books are going to fly off the shelf. And they do. Oftentimes they do. But it is oftentimes I will have a harder time trying to sell my students on an award winner from, say, 10 years ago or 15 years ago if I have graphic novels available on the shelf. Because they're not going to look and say, oh, this is an award winner, I should read it. They're going to see something far more engaging in the graphic library, which is going to capture their interest instantly. Because instead of looking at print on a page, they can get a sense for the book just by thumbing through it.
I was actually at a webinar today, School Library Journal's LibraryCon Live, and Ryan North was one of the panelists, and he said there's something intrinsically wonderful about looking at a page of print versus looking at a page of pictures with graphic novels, and you just feel more excited to read the one with pictures. Like, we're just drawn to it. So he basically said, like, that was his reason for starting in the medium, is that's what people want to read. We want to get into this pictures. And well, okay, here's a question for you then. There's so many graphic novels winning major awards, this year has been the year of the graphic novel. Is that going to hurt or help kids gravitating, or are they going to see the sticker on that and say, oh no, that's one of those award winners?
No, I will say what I have heard more is now that a graphic novel has won a major award, will it gain acceptance in the classroom to be used as a book that students can use for an assignment. I know, especially in the elementary level, when the kids come to the library, oftentimes the book that they're picking out, or they have why we call it a free choice, and then we have the one they're picking out for their book report. And, that book report book never gets to be a graphic novel. And I'm just telling you. Yep. And I know that I've heard listeners who talk about this pushback in their classrooms, when teachers come up and say it has to be a book. And what they mean is it has to be a novel. And, I work with people who will scrutinize teachers when the students are lining up. And this was obviously when the kids were allowed in my library. Right now we're in the halls, but the teachers scrutinize, and all they're doing is doing a cover check. They're looking on the front of the book. They don't care that one of the books is nonfiction. But if both of the books are, in my case, both of the books are graphic novels, the teacher will actually send the kid back to me and say, you need to go get a novel. And that's what we were hoping. We were hoping that when New Kid won, that all of a sudden teachers like that would say, wait a minute, maybe there's something to this graphic novel thing. And
so the way I've helped, well, I don't have a lot of teachers coming in for book reports and free choice and all this kind of, free reading SSR. That's not really a thing at my school, but I have two teachers that have done it in the past. And the way that I have been able to sell them, allowing the kids to get graphic novels, is equivalent exchange. So there's about 300 words on the average YA page of a YA novel. In comics, there's 100 to 150 words. And in manga, there's about 60 words. So if a kid is getting one novel, you need to get 5 manga to be equivalent to that kid's one novel. And they were okay with it.
All right. Well, and they have a supportive librarian who's like, that sounds good to me. I'm here to make sure this happens. I wanted to ask you, you've put together some amazing resources, and we've talked in this podcast over several episodes about the importance of curation. And when visitors go to your website, they're going to see under other resources, folks, this is a gem. This is a gold mine of resources. Underneath your other resources, if you just click on other resources, you've got blog posts, you have organizations, companies, and other review sites. This was where I just got lost down the rabbit hole of other resources, because I find this fascinating. How did you come up with the list that you wanted to include for people visiting your website?
So it was really the stuff that I had used. So one of the pages that I visited frequently before I started my own was No Flying, No Tights. Which I have since joined their review team. So if writing my own reviews wasn't enough, I write for them. But No Flying, No Tights is comprised entirely of other library staff people. There's public librarians, there's school librarians. And so it's other people that have a mind for graphic novels like I do that are telling you what you should put in your library. So I thought, including them was valuable. And then Comic Book Roundup is one that I would go to, because if you're rating your website, your blog, whatever, is a 10-point scale, they can include it, and you look up a title, and then it has below it all these different resources for different review sites. That's how I found Comic Book Resources. So there's just all these websites that I really found valuable when I was doing my collection development and thinking, I'm not the only one. And my district selection policy requires 2 reviews, not just the one. So if people find my website and they have a policy like mine, they need another person still. So here's all the other places you can find another person.
Well, and what caught my eye this evening, I was looking through this and just learning so much, is the Comic Book Legal Defense Fund. And this is fascinating because, friends, there's a link to the most challenged graphic novels and of the year. And, the wonderful thing is when you click on that, it's not only going to give you a review, but also explain what people found objectionable to it. And as I was scrolling, I found a book that's in my son's bedroom.
Oh, Saga.
A Saga my son received from his dad because my other son, who does not read Stephen King and who would rather draw the pictures in the graphic novels than sit down and read a book, and that is personally my private wish for my son, is that he grows up and he's a graphic novel artist. But and since he doesn't listen to the podcast, I can say that out loud. But he's in art school, and I'm very excited. But
awesome.
So yes, I found Saga, which is on the list of most challenged books, and I really, friends, I think for those of us who are moving through this space with some sort of trepidation and caution, being able to see what people found objectionable is awfully helpful, because as librarians, we always want to have the big picture. We don't like to be blindsided by something when a parent emails us and says, I have concerns.
Right.
Oh, that's really important. So,
yeah. And I include those things too, not to help with self-censoring. I know people, I'm edgy, I get it. And other people are not as edgy, but if there's something in there, your community is going to have a problem with, then yeah, you're probably not going to buy it. Let the public library do that because they're less susceptible to the types of challenges of school libraries. But too often, I think, especially in the graphic novel realm, librarians are very scared and won't take a chance at all in the off chance that a person is going to be offended by something. And so the kids could lose out on a particularly beautiful story because there's a moment of nudity or something, So I wouldn't say that it's something like that I don't ever think about. It's definitely part of it, but I don't stop myself from giving my students the stories they deserve just out of fear.
Well, and I think you're absolutely right. And I think the first time I tried to tackle the topic of self-censorship, I think I was pretty forthcoming with my cowardice. And it was something of a confessional because I have oftentimes been very concerned about certain reactions that some of my books will get. And yet, I think I've been pleasantly surprised because I found some books I have in my collection and those apparently fly under the radar and no parent has raised a single issue about some of the books I have in my collection. So I think we tend to be cautious and yet, again, parents are oftentimes so delighted that their children are reading that what is more important is that children are reading. And to me, that's really incredible. We talked about this a little bit. I wanted to give you an opportunity to just expand a little bit. But in 2018, you wrote an incredibly persuasive article for the California Association of Teachers of English titled "Graphic Novels: A Powerful Tool for Your Classroom." And you offer some inspiring ways to integrate graphic novels into your units of study. And you mentioned, you gave us some earlier examples. And do you find that once teachers have seen this be successful, that it sort of, there's a domino effect in your schools?
Definitely. There's the English example for the Shakespearean books. And the World Lit PLC is the one that has decided to move the most into graphic literature. So they also use Metamorphosis, the graphic novel. And the only knock I have on that one is in the novel, you don't know, like it's part of the story that you don't know if he really is a cockroach or not. In the graphic novel, he is. So there's not that mysticism. And then we had, what was it, 2 years ago, year and a half, George Takei's They Called Us Enemy came out, and I absolutely loved it, ate it up. I talked about it all over the place with anyone who would listen. And it just so happens, I mean, I've been at my school for 13 years, so I have some friendships, not just colleagueships. And so one of my friends is the department chair for the history department. And when she heard about how good this book was, she read it and she said, when can we use this in our world literature class? Like, I want to use this book. And so we bought a set for her and another willing teacher, which we were probably not going to get to use this year because of COVID. Like, thanks, COVID. Because they're kind of struggling right now just to get through the regular curriculum. But next year we're planning on developing an entire unit, not just with the story, but you have to do a little bit of front loading of how to read a graphic novel. It is not an intuitive process. You can't just hand these to kids and say, okay, you're good. There are different skill sets that you have to go over with them. So we're planning on developing that and then going into a whole unit of study about the internment camps with that book as the anchored text.
So I love this because it makes me remember about talking about collaborating with teams of teachers when it comes to their they're developing these units of study. But it sounds like you come from a place where you might come in across a title and include it in your collection, but then also reach out to those teachers and say, have you seen this book? Mm-hmm. Oh, that's amazing. So, I want to end on a positive note. I think so many of us have encountered pushback or scrutiny from the staff and from parents. And I'm sure that given your sustained commitment to building your graphic library, what advice would you give to those of us who are grappling with this, that sort of side eye, that judge, those judgy teachers who come in and want to know why so much money is being spent on, the quote unquote comic books and not on real books?
So the very first thing that comes to mind is data. Amass your data. It's hard to argue with hard fact and numbers. So the top 10 circulated books in my library, 6 of them are graphic novels. So that's hard to fudge. That's hard to, that's a report I can pull from and put that piece of paper in someone's face and say, look, this is why I buy them. They check them out. If you think about how many books, so at your level, you might appreciate these. How many Raina Telgemeier books can you keep on your shelf? How many Dogmen can you keep on your shelf? How many Captain Underpants can you keep on your shelf? Probably none. I actually saw a picture on, if it's either Twitter or Facebook, of someone doing their inventory, and they had their full set of Captain Underpants in, and they took a picture and they said, I need to commemorate this because this is the first and only time this is going to happen. And it's only because we haven't started curbside pickup yet.
I can totally relate because my first year in the library was the first year that Diary of a Wimpy Kid came out. So we sort of celebrate that anniversary together. So by the time I'd been in this library, I'd been buying 10 copies of each book and now it's up to book 6 or book 7. And in June, when we were bringing all the books back, they were piled up on the floor. And in my head, I said, I need more shelving for my Diary of a Wimpy Kid books. But in September, they were gone. All of them gone. Yep. I now had an empty spot where the handful could fit on the shelf. And I thought, well, that was silly because I didn't need, I got the piles on the floor, the 10 copies of each book. I didn't need to shelve those. They were all going to disappear. You're so right.
Exactly.
I love it. Sarah, you've been an absolute delight. Would you please tell us where we can follow you on social media? Because I know that your website is going to get a lot of traffic, but I think that listeners would also love to see what you're posting on a regular basis as well.
Sure. So my Twitter is at @SM_wordsmith. And that's where I post reminders of every review every day that I'm putting out on my website. So that's probably the best place. I have a Pinterest board for the website as well. The link is on my website, but I don't update that one as much. It gets maybe once every other week. I'll put the 10 titles or something that I've done in that time. There's also a way you can sign up for email. I have an email list. And so if you just hang on to, if you're on the website for 5 seconds, I think it pops up. Mm-hmm. And so you can subscribe and I send out emails. It's about twice a month. So it's not a ton of spammy all the time. I don't send one every day that I post. So that's a good way to keep in contact. And I was going to say earlier, I have one of those lovely presentations coming up that people could totally attend because it's going to be virtual. So our CSLA conference this year is virtual, and you do not have to be a member to attend. It's open to all library people, educators, administrators, anybody, and I am coordinating the graphic novel strand. So we're going to have an entire section of the conference dedicated just to graphic novels. I'm also presenting. So we don't have the registration links yet, but follow me on Twitter and I will for sure be posting that everywhere.
Could you say again the dates for your virtual conference that you were?
So it's February 11th and 12th and then 19th, 20th. So the graphic novel portion is probably going to be the 19th and 20th. So yeah,
Terrific.
And it's going to be a pretty reasonable cost because it's virtual. So it's not going to be the price of a full conference, and there's no travel.
Oh, that's wonderful. And those of us in the Midwest will probably be under a
foot of snow.
Yes, a foot of snow and a polar vortex, and we'll be looking for something to do to keep ourselves engaged. So, Sara, I'm so grateful that you came and joined us on the podcast, and I wish you a very wonderful holiday season as it comes up, and to please stay safe.
Yes, you too. Thank you for having me.
I am so grateful to Sara Smith for joining me today to share her expertise when it comes to building our graphic library. I can't think of somebody who would give us a better idea of how we can do that. And more importantly, her website is a one-stop shop. Friends, when you look at the show notes, you may say, wait a minute, that's it? But I got to tell you, it's a fantastic destination when you are building your graphic library. And I think you'll agree with me once you spend some time using this resource that it really does represent a great deal of expertise and a passion for this format. And I'm so grateful that Sara could join us and explain to us all that we need to know to move forward in building our own graphic libraries. If you found this episode helpful, please share it out with your team, your PLN, and on social media. The topic of our next episode will be multilingual libraries and my conversation with Sharon Romero. I hope you will tune in.